What is up, everybody? Welcome to this week's edition of the Touchline Talk Show. And we are going to start by going back to August 4th, 2019. Philadelphia Union playing DC United in Washington, D.C. area. So, home game for DC on Fox Sports 1. In the third minute of the game, Philadelphia Union captain Alejandro Bedoya scores the opener. As his celebration, he locates the on-field microphone and says these words: "Congress, do something. Now. End gun violence. Let's go." Drops the mic back onto the field and proceeds to lead his team to an emphatic victory on the road. Now, context here. These comments were made by Bedoya in the immediate aftermath of two mass shootings in less than 24 hours. And Alejandro Bedoya has been somebody who has never had a problem speaking his mind, regardless of the issue. And Alejandro Bedoya is also a person who has seen plenty, experienced plenty. He's played in Sweden, Scotland, and France. His wife is from Norway. He comes from a family of Colombian descent and had grandfather who played professionally in Colombia. He's lived in multiple parts of the United States. He attended college. He has that part of this experience too. And like I said, he's always somebody who has been vocal about issues he feels passionately about. So this was certainly not out of the blue in any way, shape, or form, or it wasn't like Bedoya decided he was going to start taking up causes on August 4th, 2019. But that was the day he decided he had had enough. And now we are here, almost 3 years later, trying to figure out how an 18-year-old went into a school and murdered 19 kids and 2 teachers in Texas. Of course, and unfortunately, this is commonplace. There isn't a particularly captivating angle because this happened so much, as sad as that is to say. So I was really struggling to find, as I feel like most people, at least some people were, something productive to add to this conversation. Other than, this is obviously awful, we need to do better, those kind of things. Because I'm somebody who wants to sort of have that next action step and to take the conversation to the next level. And I was really struggling to figure out how to do that. Then I listened to Steve Kerr. And one of the things Steve Kerr said really, really stuck with me. And it's simple, and it's something I knew in my head. But the way Steve Kerr delivered it really hit me. He said, "We cannot become numb to this." And part of the reason it resonated with me is because I know what he's talking about. I've not been through what Steve Kerr has been through. But I do know a thing or two about becoming numb to shootings. I have worked in a job where part of my responsibilities was to listen to police scanners and to determine what was happening when, not if, somebody was shot. Shootings were usually a daily occurrence. Sometimes it was up to 3 or 4 in a day, and even in a singular shift on that given day. There's almost no way not to become numb to it because it becomes like clockwork, as sad as that is to say. That's why that really hit me. And of course, Steve Kerr is also a very well cultured person because of the family background he comes from. Won't go into all of it. Feel free to Google it if you're not familiar with Steve Kerr's dad and his family and how he grew up. He knows about this issue. He bangs the drum every time something like this happens because he knows we can't become numb. And I am somebody who really gets frustrated. One of my pet peeves is when people go and complain about things without having a solution or a next step. To me, that just doesn't do any good, which is why I try so hard to avoid it. Doesn't mean I'm perfect, but that is something I think about regularly is, am I doing something helpful here or am I just complaining? And I don't have the solution here. But I know we need to do something. And I can say something, and I cannot let this just sort of go by. Can the legislative changes being proposed, these bills, the idea of tougher gun regulations, hurt? What is the downside? And for somebody who would say the downside is infringing upon your constitutionally protected right to own firearms, I would ask, how specifically is it infringing upon it? Is it making it more difficult? Is it actually infringing upon your right to own a firearm? And secondly, if it is about the principle of making it a little bit more difficult to own guns and making that process more stressful, drawn out, whatever, I would ask, and I've seen other people make this point, is that ease worth the price of all the people in this country getting killed by guns? Is it worth the price of these 19 kids who showed up to elementary school and didn't come home? And I'm also wondering if there is something to the fact that in 2019, it was Alejandro Bedoya on a nationally televised broadcast, and of course Steve Kerr has always been at the forefront of this. I'm wondering if there is something to the fact that it is these two people, and of course there are others, and of course these are not the only two people who have been pointing out for a long time this is a major problem, and that something needs to happen. And I don't know if there is significance to it, but I want to at least throw it out there. Because these two people in particular have plenty of experience and have a holistic concept of life outside the U.S. and the world that people who have lived their entire lives in the United States simply don't. So maybe it is time for an external, independent review kind of thing. As much as we love to talk about our rights and everything that's great about this country, there are also times where you need to be humble and realize you don't have it all figured out. Plenty of other countries in this world have this figured out. Go look at the numbers. I feel like we could probably learn something from trying to take a play out of their book, and or at least figure out exactly what the thought process was to getting to the point where it is the U.S. and the rest of the world when it comes to this issue. This is not a global issue, this is a national issue. So maybe there's something to the fact that the people who have been talking about this for 3 years, and again, plenty of people longer than that, these two people longer than that, but they were, when I saw Steve Kerr and I started thinking how to tie this to soccer, Bedoya was the guy who came to my mind. And so I'm not going to become numb to it. I urge us as a country not to become numb to it. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how much of an impact legislation will have. There are certainly multiple facets to this. If there was a quick fix, we would have figured out how to do it. But something has to change. And so maybe, just maybe, if we collectively decide to not become numb, to not dismiss this, to let ourselves feel the pain and speak out about it every time it happens, maybe, just maybe, we will get to a point where this country will behave in a way that is something other than the definition of insanity. Maybe, just maybe, one day we'll get there. On to more soccer specific and happier things. Another European trophy was handed out today. Congratulations to Roma and Jose Mourinho, the first ever Conference League champions. I don't think anybody really has a clue how significant this trophy is. It's going to take some time to figure that out. But it's a European Cup. And that's something Roma doesn't get very often. Don't get an opportunity to play for one, more specifically. And so they capitalized on it. Nico Zaniolo scores the goal in the first half. Jose Mourinho got to then do Jose Mourinho things and grind the game out against Feyenoord. Again, I don't know what the larger significance of this competition is yet. But the teams who got close were absolutely taking it seriously. Nobody was downplaying this, throwing it away, which is great to see. And, of course, there was only one guy who was ever going to win the first one of these, and that is the cup master himself, Jose Mourinho. You saw what it meant to him to get to the final. He is excellent in these situations. So now he has the Champions League, Europa League, Conference League, treble. He does this everywhere he goes, at least gets to a final, usually wins one. And not going to get too deep into this, but, and it's not as big of a talking point because he's not managing a high-profile Premier League team anymore. The way he plays just suits itself. It's the opposite of Pep Guardiola, right? The way Mourinho approaches this sport lends itself perfectly to cups, to single games and finding a way, to being able to just shut down your opponents once you get the goal, or get another one on the counterattack. My question with Mourinho has always been, and maybe it won't be a real topic of conversation ever again, depending on where he ends up managing, just because Roma aren't serious threats in the Serie A title race at this point. Maybe that changes. But can you play this way and win a league? Because at this point, I'm not convinced you can. That was my big issue with him at Man United. You can't settle for draws when you're going up against City and Liverpool. You can't do it. You have to go for 3 points every game. It's just not who he is. But absolutely, competition like this, Tammy Abraham scoring goals, some really good players around him, lower level of competition, where you feel like Roma comes in as one of the favorites. Certainly not a walk in the park. Had to get through some decent teams to get here. Beat Leicester in the semis. But this is absolutely, you looked at this from the beginning and you went, that's something Roma can go get. And this is, you hire Jose Mourinho to go win stuff. It's what he does. There are plenty of questions. There's plenty of drama, but this is why you bring him in, and he's done it at Roma again, so congratulations to him. Congratulations to them. Also want to touch briefly and sort of elaborate on Kylian Mbappe, his decision to stay at PSG and sort of what's transpired in the aftermath. Didn't get an opportunity to talk about this on this platform video-wise with the chaotic ending to the Premier League season and just the European domestic seasons coming to a close over the weekend. I did talk about it in my 5 things from the week on Substack. PSG bet on themselves one big. To me, that's what this boils down to. They could have said, you know what, we don't think we can keep him. That money, the ridiculous amount of money Real Madrid was going to throw at him is worth it. He's got a year on his contract, but if we can't keep him, take the money. It's way more than it's actually worth in that particular instance because of his contract. They said, no, we're fighting tooth and nail till the end. And sure, the money absolutely helps. But I'm not aware of anybody, including PSG, who actually thought he was going to stay. So you got to give PSG credit for sticking it out until the very end and making Mbappe say no. Because ultimately, he decided he couldn't. And I think PSG knew, this is not a hot take at all, and to me, why that was right, or regardless of what Mbappe decided, to me, why PSG were right to never give up hope is that there is literally nobody more valuable on the planet. You cannot replace him, no matter how much money you have. There is not another player that accomplished at that age. And Haaland's close, and I'm a huge Haaland guy, but he's not where Mbappe is. Mbappe is more entering the prime. He is irreplaceable. And so you're trying to finally win a Champions League. You're trying to maximize Lionel Messi. Mbappe has to be part of that, especially when your team is, if you take him out, is led by 2 guys who refuse to play defense and refuse to track back. I've seen it with my own eyes. It is a major problem. I don't know. I'm still not convinced they can win a Champions League with that front 3. But this guy having Mbappe gives you hope and a shot. And no, this is not good for the sport overall. The things he is getting as part of this are absolutely ridiculous. I just want to make sure the frustration, the criticism is aimed in the right spots. This is not Mbappe's fault. How are you going to... Don't blame Mbappe for taking the money and the power they're giving him. Let's keep the conversation where it usually is about the dangers, the moral questions with these oil-owned clubs. And Real Madrid, I mean, you can go have your lawsuit, La Liga. It's just funny coming from Real Madrid as the team complaining about all of this stuff, because you know they were ready to offer him a boatload of money too. And they're complaining about how they can't keep up with the best players anymore, as if teams in La Liga have been able to keep up with them, which is never... It's an inherently unfair sport. Now, it's getting more unfair, and there are certainly concerns and valid points there, and changes that should be made. But let's make sure this isn't coming down on Mbappe. This was in motion way before he ended up in this position, and certainly had nothing to do with any of it. He got offered the money. He said, I'll stay for another 3 years. Now, the part Mbappe has not been helpful with moving forward is that he has already proceeded to talk about how his mom is a Liverpool fan and AC Milan was one of his favorite clubs growing up. Immediately after signing this contract. And again, he's going to be 26 at the end of it. I fully expect we're going to get into another Mbappe sweepstakes in, again, 26. And you know Real Madrid's going to be a factor. And who knows who else, what Liverpool's situation might be then. I mean, it quieted stuff for now. And it's a huge deal, of course. But the speculation, the rumors, let's say it's a year and a half go by and it's not looking good on the PSG front. We're going to get right back to where teams are going to try and go in and get him a year early because they think they can get him to commit his long-term future to him and still get, absolutely prime years. Give him a four-year contract and you're still getting a great return at the end of it. So the speculation about what's next is always going to be there because he didn't exactly commit the rest of his career to PSG. And when he's going out and saying stuff like this, that certainly doesn't help with that regard either. So PSG is operating in the short term. They had to do what they had to do to get him to stay. They did. You worry about the next part when it comes up. Also, quickly wanted to mention the UK government has approved the sale of Chelsea. It's gone through, given the thumbs up, which is very convenient considering their license to operate was expiring at the end of this month. As these bumps and these hiccups kept coming, and it wasn't exactly clear whether Abramovich was going to allow the money to go to where it was originally supposed to, that became a question here, is what happens if they're not settled by the end of May and that license expires. Now that is not a question. It seems we are all systems go to get the new ownership group in place, to get the asset freeze by the government off and get Chelsea back to functioning normally. And this was my thing. Again, we didn't get to talk about it here when the deal initially got reported. They lost their impending free agents, if you will. Probably. There's a possibility Azpilicueta maybe stays, but Rudiger's already announced he's gone. It seems like Christensen's gone as well. You couldn't save those guys who have played a huge role for your team. And who's going to blame them? You're not about to go, A, they couldn't sign a contract extension, and B, who would want to sign one even if they could with a club with that much uncertainty surrounding their future, when the biggest clubs in the world are happy to offer you plenty of money to go play for them. But it does look like Chelsea have saved their summer. And that is huge. Because they got plenty of decisions to make about how they're moving forward, who's staying, what do you do with Lukaku. You got some midfielders who are now entering the final year of their contract. You have a defense to more or less replace, at least centrally. And you're going to have to figure out how you start operating with this new ownership group and whatever that is going to look like from a budget payroll perspective. Because they don't have the same money Abramovich did. So, we appear to be all systems go for Chelsea in this transfer window, which means they can sort of start this transition into whatever they're going to be in the next iteration of their future, the next era. It could have gotten much worse. It's been a long road. They certainly paid a huge price for this, from the sponsorships to the players they lost, the frozen assets, and not only, this is not just about Abramovich. This is also the employees of the club who one day were just told they're not allowed to work anymore and nobody really knew what was going to happen next or when they'd be able to return. There has been a huge price to pay by people who had nothing to do with Roman Abramovich. But barring something really unforeseen, we're going to get back to Chelsea being Chelsea. We're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we are going to discuss the Premier League all-important team I unveiled on Substack this morning, what it is, why I like doing it, and of course, who made the starting 11. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Like I said, we're going to go through part of the all important team, the starting lineup for the Premier League this season. The goal here, and why I love this concept, is this is not about the best. This is the most indispensable, most valuable, whatever words you want to use. It's putting the V back in MVP. That's kind of how I like to describe it. These are the guys that you look back on and you go, I don't know where their team would have been without them. Which inherently means players from clubs like Liverpool and Manchester City are at a massive disadvantage. Because, where would Manchester City be without Gabriel Jesus? Well, he's probably going to leave and they're going to be just fine. What would Alisson look like without Virgil van Dijk? And so, certainly these teams are well represented on this list. But that is, again, this is not about best 11. This is not about players of the year. This is about the players that are so important to their teams. And you look back on their team season, you go, they wouldn't have got there without this player. And then there are also some superstars who are just so great and so important that they made this team anyway because, well, they're some of the best players in the world. So we start with our goalkeeper, Jose Sa. Maybe not the name you expected. And this is one of those examples of go look at the numbers from a what he was asked to do standpoint. Nobody came close. 8 goalies in the Premier League faced at least 150 shots on target this season. 7 of those goalies allowed at least 1.3 goals per 90 minutes. The other one was Sa. He allowed 1.10. Also led the league in save percentage. You can go down the list. Go to the more advanced metrics. He was an absolute difference maker. And again, this comes back to the, what happens if you put Wolves defense or the Wolves team in front of Ederson or Alisson? If I'm picking a goalie, I want those 2 guys before Sa. But neither of them were more important to their team, and especially from a shot-stopping, traditional goalkeeping standpoint. Because there's no way to quantify Ederson's ability to just drill a ball on a dime 50 yards. That is important to what Pep does. But ultimately, I'm not going to overthink that part of it, lean too much on that part of it. He was one of the most tested goalkeepers in the league, and he fared significantly better than the other ones who were up there in terms of the amount of shots faced and the shots on target. We're just going to leave it right there. Absolutely deserving of his spot. Left back. And here we go into the Manchester City Liverpool portion. It's João Cancelo. He had the most completed passes in the league. He had the second most progressive passes, 274. And it just so happens he's the best player in the world at his position. But again, that's not why he's on this team. As I talked about during the Champions League, as good of a player as Alexander Zinchenko is, and he's a very good one, Cancelo just brings you something completely different with his playmaking ability. They don't have another outside back like him. The only one who's close in the Premier League is Andy Robertson. But Cancelo is much more solid defensively. I believe he was also top 10 in the league in tackles. He is the complete package in a way that neither of Liverpool's are. And the bonus points come when you talk about the role he plays in Pep's system. The fact he is the initiator of at least some of their offense, what those outside backs are asked to do for Pep, and he's just absolutely excellent. Didn't have to think hard about that one at all. Joining him on his side of the field as the center back, Virgil van Dijk. Let's just go through the last 4 seasons for Liverpool. Lose out to City by a point. Have one of the best years in Premier League history. Win the title. Van Dijk gets hurt and they finish with 69 points. Nearly win the quadruple and finish a point behind City again. That's really that's all we need here. He is one of the most valuable players in the Premier League, period. His ability to cut out trouble, reduce the amount of traffic Alisson sees, his presence in the box, his passing ability. We're not going to overthink this. He is arguably the most valuable player Liverpool has. And the same goes on the other side for Ruben Dias. Similar idea. These two guys are just so head and shoulders above the rest of the center backs in the Premier League. And Diaz was in the 99th percentile among center backs in progressive carrying distance, top 5 league center backs. So the best players in Europe. And he's way up there in the top percentiles of many important progressive, ball carrying passing statistics. And of course, he's also just a terrific pure defender. Not gonna make it harder than it has to be. They are the best 2 center backs. They're the 2 most valuable center backs, 2 most important ones. And on we go. And a right back, Trent Alexander-Arnold. He had the most expected assists in the league. Only Mo Salah actually had more. He is one of the best passers in the league, if not the best. And the reason that this might have been the singular easiest decision to make is that for all of Liverpool's depth, they do not have a suitable replacement for him. Now, by suitable, I mean somebody you can put into the starting lineup and not feel like there's a drop-off or that you're trying to plug a hole. Because James Milner and Joe Gomez are plugging holes. They're very good players. James Milner's had a terrific career. But they are not traditional deputies the way Andy Robertson has Samikas. The drop-off just isn't that great if you switch the left backs. It's a completely different story on the right side. That's the other reason Alexander-Arnold makes it easily. Then we go into the midfield. Yes, Kevin De Bruyne is also here. I will continue to argue Kevin De Bruyne is underappreciated. He is more important than you think, even though he plays for Manchester City. And it also helps his case that 8 of his 15 goals came from the beginning of March to the end of the season. He scored 4 in one game. 3 of the other ones came against Liverpool and Manchester United. He delivered in the biggest way when his team needed him the most. They don't win that title without his performance at the end. The way they just continue to keep the pressure up and never let Liverpool get a foothold, really. Aside from that one slip-up against West Ham, right? They got the draw when they played Liverpool. And the numbers by themselves justify a spot on this team. There's also the part of this that he is the guy that makes the Pep engine run. And when you win the league, again, you're one of the best teams in the league has ever seen. Yeah, you're going to make it. Bottom line. Joining him, Mason Mount. Not good season for Chelsea. Arguably disastrous. I wouldn't go quite that far, but certainly you don't come out feeling really good and like there's a bunch of rays of sunshine headed toward that club. Now, the sale helps with that, but from a looking forward from a squad standpoint. And then Mason Mount doubles his production essentially from 2 seasons ago now. He was an absolute bright spot on a team that had very, very few. I would argue maybe they had, I guess you could say three. Mendy, certainly Antonio Rudiger, and Mount. He was their best offensive player. Full stop. And he played more than any of the other attacking players because he was the one guy that was undroppable and Tuchel just knew he could trust him. And he delivered. He was the most productive player on this team. He is one of three players that reached double digits in both goals and assists. The other two are on this list, on this team. Didn't have to think too hard about this one either. When you finish third in the league, you should be represented somehow, and Mount was easily the most deserving candidate, the easiest one to fit in. Holding midfielder, Calvin Phillips. I have been on this since his first season in the Premier League. The only explanation for people who are taken aback by this is you don't watch Leeds play or don't watch them very often. This is something I could do without the numbers. But then you go look at the numbers, and the numbers prove an even more staggering point and make his inclusion even more justifiable. He played 20 games this year. 5 wins, 6 losses, 9 draws. Yes, the Leeds team that almost got relegated. 5 wins, 6 losses, 9 draws. I believe it was 5 clean sheets as well. Leeds. Marcelo Bielsa leads. That is how important this guy is. Now, yes, he was not the only one hurt. So losing Patrick Bamford certainly had something to do with their struggles as well. They were rolling guys in and out all season. Their defense had more or less collapsed by the end with all the suspensions and injuries. But he is, in many ways, he and the next guy are the faces of this team. Again, this is not based on accomplishments this season. This is all important. And you can prove you are important by not playing. It is not a coincidence to me that Leeds struggled this mightily after doing so well last season when Phillips was unavailable for essentially half the year. He is sensational at what he does. There's a reason he is now a constant figure in the English national team. There's a reason he's always going to be linked to moves to bigger clubs. He is every bit that good and every bit that important. I already hinted about this guy and said he was going to be on this team. And so here's Jared Bowen. Another one of those guys that reached double digits, 12 goals, 10 assists, 5th in total goal contributions in the Premier League this season. And again, it's not just the numbers, it's what he meant to this team. This team was trying to get to the Europa League final, ultimately came up a little bit short, while also staying right in the thick of the top 6 race the entire season. Had they won their last game, they would have been 6th with a tiny squad. And Michail Antonio did his 10-goal thing. Thomas Souček was nowhere near as productive from a goal-scoring standpoint, so somebody had to make up the slack if they were going to keep pushing to be that next team outside the top 6. Enter Jared Bowen. He was absolutely spectacular. They don't come close to sustaining their pressure on both fronts the way they did without him. Again, did he have one of the 3 best attacking seasons in the league? No, probably not. But was he one of the 3 most important attackers? You betcha. Yeah, the Golden Boot winner who doesn't take penalties, he's going to get included on the list, especially when his team finishes 4th. He had 5 more goals from outside the penalty spot, if you will, than any other player in the Premier League. Yes, Son shared the golden boot with Mo Salah, but Mo Salah is the penalty taker. Imagine what Son's numbers would have been if Harry Kane wasn't his teammate or Harry Kane wasn't so good at taking penalties. He was absolutely spectacular. And this spot was going to go to him or Kane. There wasn't room for both of them. And there is part of me that wanted to put Kane here because of his link up play and the stuff he does outside of the numbers. But then you think back to the beginning of the season and the very shaky start, the drama with the Manchester City thing. He didn't get going for a while. And meanwhile, Son is as good as any attacking player in the Premier League. So the more I thought about it, the more I thought this isn't a discussion. He was that valuable. It's not like Kane's assist numbers were way better than Son's. Son's did plenty of helping other players too. And he was just sensational. So, he was so good, and that team needed those goals so badly at some points that there was no way he was going to lose this spot. And then finally, yes, Mo Salah, surprise, surprise. I mean, he and, speaking of Harry Kane, are now the only two players, unless I got my going back and forth between goals and assists wrong, only two players to lead the Premier League in both in a single season this millennium. And the thing with Salah has always been he just doesn't do a lot assist-wise. He doesn't do a lot for his teammates. You know, he's very much sort of single-minded, terrific player. Just has a tendency to sort of get focused on shooting and doing it himself. He led the Premier League in assists. He pulled out, and I feel like the longer Salah has gone, the more unfair that characterization has become. Because this is not the first year he's had good assist numbers. And of course, it helps his team score so many goals, and he's got so many great players around him. But if you were to told me that Salah would have been the one to do it after Harry Kane, would not have believed you. And of course, Liverpool were terrific. He also tied for the Golden Boot. He's a top 3 player in the world. So yeah, Mo Salah is going to be on the team. We're going to take one more quick break. When we come back, we have speaking of Liverpool and Mo Salah, we have a Champions League final to discuss. We're going to go back a little bit to that previous matchup in 2018 in Kiev. Sort of what that means, what we can take from it for this one, key matchups to look for, those kind of things. So we'll get you all ready for the Champions League final. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. So here we go. One more game. The granddaddy of them all, if you will. Champions League final. Liverpool, Real Madrid. Of course, these two teams have history. It's why Mo Salah, when asked before if he wanted City or Real Madrid, said he wanted Real Madrid. So let's start by going back to that game. Your players still on Liverpool who started. Sadio Mane, Roberto Firmino, Mo Salah, Jordan Henderson, James Milner, Andy Robertson, Virgil van Dijk, Trent Alexander-Arnold. Their entire bench is no longer with the club. There's been a little bit of turnover. For Real Madrid, Karim Benzema, Isco, Toni Kroos, Casemiro, Luka Modric, Marcelo, and Dani Carvajal started. Nacho, Gareth Bale, Marco Asensio came on off the bench. Lucas Vazquez was among the substitutes but did not feature. Those are your players who actually have history in this game that were there 2018. If you don't remember what happened in that game, you had the Sergio Ramos incident that led to Mo Salah having to leave with the shoulder injury. That was a 0-0 game. The scoring started when Loris Karius threw the ball more or less at Karim Benzema and just sort of asked him to put it into the net. This was the game with the goalkeeping mistakes. That was the first one. 4 minutes later, though, Sadio Mane gets on the end of what started from a Liverpool corner to equalize. And it's game on. You think, okay, Liverpool are back in this. Then Gareth Bale comes on. And Gareth Bale has his bicycle kick to put Real Madrid back up. Remember that it's the best goal of his career. That, again, was this game against Liverpool. And then you had his shot from, it must have been 40 yards. Maybe 35. But from way out there, that hits Karius in the hands and just kind of goes through his hands and into the net to seal the deal late for Real Madrid. This was the we need to go get Alisson game. And so Liverpool come back, get that next opportunity against Spurs, and get their Champions League title. In that game, because there are so many players who were involved in it that are still factors in this game and key players in this game, I do think there is some value to sort of looking at how that game went. Real Madrid had 61% of the possession and completed more than twice as many passes as Liverpool. Not quite sure that's going to happen again. This was still Liverpool trying to figure out who they were. They have certainly done that now. Both teams had 12 shots, but Real Madrid had a 5-2 edge with shots on target. It was certainly lopsided, and Real Madrid were deserved winners. The big what if is, of course, what happens if Mo Salah doesn't have to leave the game. Who knows? I would still argue this was Liverpool learning what it takes to get to that point. Of course, these Real Madrid guys are so battle-tested, even by 2018, that they are the standards. You got to do something to unseat them. It's a little bit different this time around. The matchups I'm looking for here. A couple in particular. First of all, it's the midfield. I've been harping on this since we had that series of shaky performances by the Liverpool midfield, both domestically and against Villarreal, where they just were not able to influence the game. They were non-factors, and then sort of would come to life. But there were long stretches of time where you were just wondering what is going on here. And I specifically said, I don't remember which game it was, but if that Liverpool midfield is not better, they're going to be in big trouble against either of the teams on the other side of the Champions League bracket. Because that's Luka Modric, Toni Kroos, and Casemiro with Edward Camavinga coming off the bench. They will absolutely expose you if you can't dictate the terms of the game. And if you can't get your high press going. And that's why this in particular with the midfield is so important to Liverpool. It's because everything they do is built on the high press, the forcing turnovers, the rhythm, disrupting the other team's rhythm. Right? This is not a midfield that is built to have sort of a Kevin De Bruyne type in it. You've got more of your traditional holding midfielder in Fabinho, and then a bunch of guys who are just sort of box-to-box, high energy, really good passers. Thiago is not exactly high energy when it comes to pressing, but you get the point. They are excellent at getting into transition. And then you have the other part of this where you throw Thiago in the mix, and now all of a sudden you have a guy who can break apart a defense with his passing too. And on that front, we will have to see if he what the injury status ends up being there. Klopp seems optimistic. He's going to try to give it a go in terms of trying to make at least the bench and be available for the game. We'll see if it actually happens, but he has not been ruled out yet. And the news seems to be getting better, not worse. So, if you could, I mean, even if you could just have him for 20 minutes off the bench in a tie game late, he is so special. That could absolutely be the difference. And if he is not in the starting lineup, then who replaces him? You would probably think it's Jordan Henderson, and it's and maybe a Naby Keita in there. We'll have to see what Klopp does, because he's kind of got his preferred setup, and that includes Thiago. So, but on the other injury fronts, it seems like everybody is good to go. They were just playing it as cautious as possible. Van Dijk, Salah should be fit from the start in this one. It's what it appears. And then the other part of this midfield battle is, can one of the two midfields create the decisive moment of the game? The way Luka Modric did with that pass against Chelsea. The way Thiago absolutely can with his passing. And more for Liverpool, can you stop Real Madrid's midfield from being the difference in the game? Because Benzema absolutely can be the difference in the game, as can whatever combination of three attackers you would have to think it's Salah, Mane, and Diaz Klopp throws out there. Liverpool have more difference makers in that front three. And Vinicius is the other one. We'll get to him in a minute. But there is more from a playmaking standpoint. There is much more asked of Real Madrid, because you have a 10 in Luka Modric who does those kind of things. Again, Liverpool, right? It's so much based off of turnovers and high pressing. And certainly Real Madrid have some of that too, but it is not drilled into the DNA of these players in this club the way it is Liverpool. So are we going to look back on this game and say Liverpool got overran in midfield, Modric was brilliant, or Casemiro really, really screened that back line well and did his thing where he gets really close to a bunch of yellow cards and really bothered Liverpool's attack, and they just couldn't get connected with the midfield? Are we talking about Casemiro getting sent off? This could go different directions. But to me, any Real Madrid win starts with winning the midfield battle. And it's sort of true for Liverpool as well, but it's more just mitigating any potential advantage from Real Madrid there. So then we get to the other part. The individual matchup that is potentially the most important and arguably the most intriguing is Vinicius and Trent Alexander-Arnold. I have given my whole spiel about how important it is for Liverpool that they have possession of, and that's the other part of their midfield thing too, is can you hold on to the ball? They have possession of the ball because it allows their fullbacks to get forward and do the things they do best. And it creates a whole new dimension to Liverpool's attack when you got Alexander-Arnold and Robinson playing in crosses. And the ability to get them into scoring areas. Robertson's really good at making those diagonal runs. You see so much of that, Alexander-Arnold to Robertson passing. That kind of stuff doesn't happen if they're getting pinned back. You saw what Vinicius did to poor Fernandinho. Now, Alexander-Arnold is in a much better place physically, athletically to deal with Vinicius than Fernandinho was. But this is also a Trent Alexander-Arnold who has struggled defensively at times. Which one is going to show up? The one who looked real shaky in the first half of that second leg against Villarreal, or the one who was absolutely brilliant in the FA Cup final? That is a huge question. Because if he falls asleep at that post and he is not staying between Vinicius and the ball, that is huge trouble for Liverpool. Huge trouble. And it has happened. Villarreal showed you how to do it. And Vinicius is the kind of player that can burn you alive doing it. Absolutely expose you. On the other hand, if the midfield can keep Modric in check, and if Alexander-Arnold can be fundamentally sound defensively, and not make any of those mistakes that allow Vinicius to get on the end of anything, now you're in a tough spot if you're Real Madrid and trying to get service to Benzema. Now, of course, all he needs is one chance. He's in terrific form. He's as good as any player in the world at the moment. But some of that is predicated on Modric setting him up, the wingers getting involved. Right, he is much more of a true finisher, a pure 9, than a Harry Kane type who's going to drop in and can lead the Premier League in assists. Benzema can get isolated on an island if, and we've seen in the Champions League, if he's not getting the service, if Real Madrid is not clicking and there's a lack of continuity between the different pieces. So to me, that's what this is going to come down to. If Real Madrid can hold on to the ball because Liverpool's midfield is shaky and they can't connect passes and they're struggling when they get pressed, and all of a sudden Alexander-Arnold is playing and Robertson are playing defense and not able to get forward, absolutely, I'll take my chances with Vinicius and Benzema for Real Madrid to win that game. It's a tough task, though. These guys have, of course, been there before. They have the magic of this tournament. And it's an interesting psychological question if you're Liverpool too, of how do the events of Sunday impact this game? Of course you would want to say the answer is they don't at all. But they're humans. Do they come out a little bit lethargic because they were that close to playing for a quadruple? Or are they so disappointed they came that close? They are determined to make sure they don't let this one slip away too. This is, I don't want to say it's a different level for Real Madrid because that is disrespectful to Manchester City. I do believe this is a stiffer challenge because Liverpool are more comfortable playing in the chaos. A lot of what they do is trying to create it. And they also have the ability to pick you apart if you just sit back. Right? They get into those modes where it just feels inevitable a goal is coming. You have to find a way to disrupt them. But they don't need everything to go right in order to make it happen. And a perfect example was the Wolves game. They weren't good, but they found a way. And so to me, that's what makes this challenge, if I'm Real Madrid, and I'm a Real Madrid fan, I do feel this is a different level of challenge in this particular matchup. This isn't a Liverpool-Manchester City thing. This is for a team that's as battle-tested as Real Madrid, playing a team that is so system-oriented and so programmed. If you can find, right, they've got that ability to find the way to wreak havoc for 30 minutes and come with a flurry of goals. That's not going to faze Liverpool the same way. And it won't snowball as much. That was one of the shocking things to me about that first half in the Villarreal game was you don't usually see it snowball like that on Liverpool, right? 1 led to 2, and they couldn't get out of it for 45 minutes. but also they have the ability to turn the script around in the second half because Klopp's a great in-game adjuster and they're an all-time great team. So I'm going with Liverpool when it's all said and done. I expect them to do this. I also believe that I'm a big advocate of the difficulty in repeating and the extra motivation that comes from coming so close and then losing. I don't believe it's because anybody doesn't care as much if you didn't lose the season before. I believe there's something you can just draw from, this extra ounce of motivation, if you lose in a Champions League final, for example. It's part of what made Real Madrid's ability to do this year after year so incredible, is they never lost that drive and never lost that edge. And it's really easy to. So this is kind of strange in that sense, too, because both of these teams have tasted it. There are plenty of players on this Liverpool team who, however, who have not, or haven't done it in Liverpool. And while both these teams have Champions League titles, I do think it says something that Salah publicly declared he wanted another shot at Real Madrid. And maybe it's just him personally because of how that game went. But if you're Real Madrid, you don't want to be giving Liverpool any extra edge. Your task is difficult enough already. And it just so happens you beat them the last time in somewhat humiliating fashion just because of the way the goals were conceded, not the performance overall. But you better believe that stuck in some guys' minds, particularly Mo Salah. And then there's also what happens with Salah and Mane is Mo Salah. Now, he did say in the lead up to this game he's going to be at Liverpool next season no matter what happens contract-wise. For what that's worth, probably it means a great deal. I'm always taking everything with a grain of salt because that's just the way this sport works when it comes to transfers. But is this a potential audition for a eventual move to Real Madrid? Not that he needs to prove anything, but there are plenty of intriguing storylines surrounding this outside of just these two great teams, these two teams that have really become synonymous with this trophy in this tournament. So we will see how it all plays out. But again, I'm going with Liverpool. I've bet against Real Madrid, not the entire way, but specifically in the semifinals. So, got to keep doing it. If they pull this off, I will have completely learned my lesson. I certainly admitted a little oversight and gave them credit for what they did against Manchester City in terms of proving they are back in the elite tier of the sport. I still feel they're a tick below Manchester City and Liverpool, which I'm sure most people agree with me on that. But it's Real Madrid, it's the Champions League. One game, we will see what happens. Enjoy the Champions League final, enjoy the championship playoff final, both happening this weekend. That is all for our show today. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll be back after the Champions League. We'll do a recap video, match report for the game. So there'll be no Monday weekend roundup. We're going to sort of do that as a Champions League recap instead. So be on the lookout for that after the game on Saturday. That's all we've got, and we will see you next time.